Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. (1,589 days, 21 rounds of military talks, 17 rounds of diplomatic talks, and finally India and China have clinched a border deal. It is a big deal. They're set to resolve the crisis of 2020. India's Foreign Secretary announced it today. He said both sides have agreed to a patrolling arrangement, meaning Indian soldiers can return to the LAC, that's the line of actual control, LAC. It's the de facto border between India and China.
Now, as a result of the discussions that have taken place over the last several weeks, an agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas, and this is leading to disengagement and eventually a resolution of the issues that had arisen in these areas in 2020.
What a day to announce it. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is flying to Russia tomorrow. He is attending the BRICS summit in Kazan. And guess who else will be there? China's President Xi Jinping. So clearly, this is not a random announcement. It is supposed to set the stage, perhaps for a meeting between Modi and Xi. But more on that later. First, let's take a closer look at this deal. How will it change the LAC situation, the border situation? Think back to June 2020. India and China clashed in the Galwan Valley. Soldiers were killed on both sides. After that, the LAC became highly militarized. China blocked Indian troops from certain points. India did the same to Chinese troops. What followed was a long diplomatic and military campaign. Corps commanders met regularly. Diplomats kept in touch. Even foreign ministers had a couple of meetings. So one by one, the issues were sorted out. In some places, there was disengagement, meaning the soldiers were pulled back. And in some places, buffer zones were created, zones which neither side could enter. By the middle of this year, only two issues remained, Demchok and Depsang. These are places in eastern Ladakh. Only their future remained undecided. But reports say that's not the case anymore. This border deal covers Demchok and Depsang as well. In simple words, it's like a reset. The soldiers will go back to the status quo before 2020. Which brings us to patrolling. Can Indian troops patrol the same areas as they did before? Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar says they can. He called this deal a good and positive development.
I think the understanding, to my knowledge, is that we will be able to do the patrolling which we were doing in 2020. I think it's a good development. It's a positive development, and I would say it's a product of very patient and very persevering diplomacy.
Such deals often have multiple moving parts. It could be days before we get a clear picture. Having said that, two things are certain. One, there is political will to fix this relationship. Neither side wants to keep this issue alive. They want to move on, maybe focus on lucrative topics. The government of India dropped a big hint this year. They openly call for more Chinese direct investments in India. Beijing, of course, was always game. Secondly, the momentum for this deal was built in the last few months. Look at all the engagements. In early July, Jaishankar met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Both men were attending an SCO meeting. Later that month, they met again in Laos. So 2 meetings in 1 month. India and China also have a special mechanism to discuss border issues. It's called the WMCC, the Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination, WMCC. This group had 2 meetings in July and August. And amid all this, China started talking. Their defense ministry hinted at a breakthrough. They said India and China had expanded their consensus. Now, don't mistake this momentum for magic. This deal was not magically conjured. It is the result of years of painstaking diplomacy. Only the finishing touches were applied in the last few months. Chances are they wanted it done before the BRICS summit, much like we saw in 2017. Back then, China and India were locked in a different standoff. This was in Doklam. But before the 2017 BRICS summit, they disengaged. Prime Minister Modi went on to meet President Xi on the sidelines of that BRICS summit in 2017. So will there be a repeat in Kazan? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Prime Minister Modi is going there tomorrow. But the timing is certainly interesting. You had 4.5 years to hold talks to fix this issue. So why are you doing it now? Well, China is under a lot of pressure. That could be one reason. Their economic growth has largely stalled. Plus, they may soon have to deal with a Trump presidency in the US, meaning another tariff war. So it makes sense for China to woo India. Same with strategy. Beijing is facing pushbacks in the South China Sea. Filipino vessels are standing up to Chinese piracy. There's a standoff almost every month. So maybe Xi Jinping wants to focus his energy there in the South China Sea. But for that, he needs a stable Himalayan frontier. Those could be his reasons. What about India? What are India's reasons? New Delhi's position has always been quite clear on this. Fix the border and we can normalize ties. Perhaps China finally listened to that. We will have to wait for the details to come out, for all the details of this deal to come out. But if this deal restores the pre-2020 situation, it is a win for India. No reason to reject such a deal. Also, it's the practical thing to do. We've seen 2 wars unfold in the last 3 years. No one wants to see more of that, especially not between India and China. We're talking about 2 big and powerful neighbors. So both sides had reasons to clinch this deal. What's important is what comes next. We have disengagement, yes, but will we also have de-escalation? Remember, India and China have deployed more than 50,000 soldiers to the border. Will those troops remain there, or will there be a reduction in those numbers? That's one thing to look out for. Secondly, this deal, while very significant, is just a band-aid in the larger scheme of things. This border, the LAC, is more than 3,400 kilometers long. It is the longest unsettled border in the world, not to mention poorly drawn. And an unsettled border is a recipe for disaster, especially between 2 military powerhouses. And third, the competition will only get worse from here. We are talking about 2 countries with more than 1 billion people each, both rising politically, both expanding financially, and both with geopolitical ambitions. So naturally, it won't always be easy. Foreign Minister Jaishankar highlighted this problem too.
Here is the challenge for us, which is that we are neighbors. We have an unresolved boundary issue. They have been rising. We have also been rising. So if 2 large neighboring countries rise next to each other in the same time frame, it's not easy. There are very, very few historical parallels for that.
Like all relations, this one is also complicated. China is India's largest trading partner. Bilateral trade is worth nearly $118 billion. And for Beijing, India is a key market. So both sides are keen to milk the possibilities. At the same time, major political challenges exist. China is set on toppling American supremacy on the world stage. They want to dominate the world order. But India wants to reshape it, to make it more just and effective. You can see these different objectives at the BRICS too. China considers BRICS to be anti-West. India does not. How do you reconcile these differences? How do you work together when you're competing for the same things? Whether it's foreign investments or manufacturing jobs or leadership of the global South. That is the next challenge for this relationship. Of course, a lot will depend on China. Will they stick to their end of the bargain? Will they engage in good faith? Or will they betray India's trust yet again? The past, you see, does not inspire much confidence, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's been weeks in the making, but it could finally happen now. We're talking about Israel's attack on Iran. Look at the build-up. Israel has the THAAD missile system. It's an American system that was deployed recently. The US has also sent 100 soldiers to Israel to operate this system. Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attack, is dead, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been dropping hints. Iran could be his next target.
Well, 2 days ago, we took out Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist mastermind whose goons beheaded our men, raped our women, burnt babies alive. We took him out, and we're continuing our battle with Iran's other terrorist proxies. We're going to win this war.
Netanyahu released that video over the weekend. His home in northern Israel was attacked by a drone. It happened on Saturday morning. This was a Hezbollah operation. They launched 3 drones from Lebanon. They failed to cause any serious harm. 2 drones were intercepted. The third one struck a building and caused some damage. Israel has not released details about this strike. We don't know if this drone hit Netanyahu's home or not, or which building was damaged in the attack. But here's what we can tell you. When Hezbollah launched their attack, Netanyahu and his wife were not at the residence. No one was hurt, and their response was sharp. Israel intensified its bombing campaign in both Lebanon and Gaza.
اطفي النور اطفي النور بقى مين
So Iranian proxies are gunning for Netanyahu as he prepares to attack Tehran. How do we know for sure? Well, Israel's war plans have been leaked. Americans have been gathering intelligence on Israel, and their assessments, the American assessments, have surfaced online. A source called the Middle East Spectator released these papers. Copies of these documents were first spotted on Telegram. Reports say the Middle East Spectator has links to Iran. But how did they get access to these top secret plans? Apparently, someone from within the US establishment leaked these secret documents. And they're not fake. Multiple media outlets have verified them, saying that these are legitimate papers. And what do they tell us? They describe an elaborate operation. How does Israel plan to strike Iran? Using its air force. Israeli Air Force continues preparations for strikes on Iran. That's literally the title of one of these documents. Inside, there are satellite images and intercepted conversations. They reveal the depth of Israel's planning. Apparently, the IDF is preparing dozens of aircraft and missiles. F-15 fighter jets and drones are involved. Israeli pilots have been doing training exercises. There's also a mention of 3 Israeli airfields being used: combat, search and rescue aircraft, surveillance aircraft, and refueling aircraft. Like I said, this is quite an extensive plan. It also describes the potential scale of the operation, the use of multiple airfields, aircraft and drones, refueling aircraft, search and rescue teams. All of this suggests that Israel is planning a big operation. And which targets are they aiming for? Well, there is no mention of targets in these papers, but several reports claim that Israel will go after Iranian military sites. Although Tehran believes it will be worse, that Israel will strike its nuclear installations. So Iran has issued a warning and lodged a complaint at the United Nations.
We have sent our protest letter to the Secretariat and the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is a fundamental responsibility of the Foreign Ministry, and we will certainly pursue this matter further.
It all comes down to Netanyahu now. Taking out Sinwar gave him a political boost. A new poll, in fact, reflects this. Netanyahu's Likud party has come out on top. If elections were to be held today, Netanyahu's party, the Likud party, will be the largest one in Israel. But here's the other side of the story. Israelis do not want the war to go on, at least according to this poll. They want Prime Minister Netanyahu to sign a deal and get the hostages back from Gaza. In fact, many Israelis have been protesting. Over the weekend, they took to the streets in Tel Aviv.
I think the recent developments, especially Sinwar's death, makes us both extremely anxious for her fate. but also hopeful that this might be a turning point, that this should be used as a means to seal the deal, to end the hostage situation and bring them all home now.
So I think that these events that we saw this week provide a strong message to all of our enemies that we are continue to fight them and we will not surrender to the terrors. But at the same time, we are looking to have a deal to bring our hostages back home as soon as possible. And this is the right time to do it.
Will Netanyahu listen to these calls? To free all hostages, he must agree to a ceasefire, and that's something that he keeps rejecting. But the US has been piling on the pressure, asking the Israeli leader to end the fighting. US President Biden is sending his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to Israel today. This will be Blinken's 11th visit to Israel in 1 year. He's trying to revive the dialogue for a ceasefire, although it's a long shot. With the US elections round the corner and Biden's time in office nearing its end, Netanyahu has every reason to thwart his moves. And given his recent successes, he's more likely to take bigger risks now. As you know, wars aren't just fought on the battlefield. There are a number of ways to cripple the enemy. One of the most important ones is crushing morale, making the enemy lose the will to fight, lose the will to pick up a weapon. And this is the best victory of all. And that is what Israel tried to achieve on Friday, when they released the video of Yahya Sinwar's final moments. Those of you following the war closely have already seen this. Sinwar in the chair, covered in dust, trying to throw a stick at a drone. Israel thought that this would project its strength and demoralize its enemies. But the opposite happened. Israel's enemies thought that Sinwar's last moments were inspirational. He was wearing the symbolic Palestinian keffiyeh scarf. His arm was injured, but he was still defiant, still trying to attack the high-tech Israeli enemy. That is how Hamas is choosing to interpret Sinwar's death. So in terms of the narrative war, releasing Sinwar's video was a self-goal by Israel. And now they're in damage control mode. Before his death video, what had Israel been saying about Yahya Sinwar? They portrayed him as a coward, lurking in the tunnels, protecting himself with human shields, while ordinary Palestinians paid the price for his actions. That was the original Israeli narrative. And now they're trying to reinforce it.
Tonight we are declassifying footage of Sinwar from just a few hours before the October 7th massacre, as well as his movements inside Gaza as he fled over the past year.
That was allegedly footage from October 6, 2023. That's last year, October 6th, the night before the Hamas attack on Israel took place. Sinwar is seen preparing to live underground. He's moving supplies, water bottles, pillows, and mattresses. He's taking his wife and children into an underground shelter. Now, Israel says it's beneath his house in Khan Yunis. So they claim that he was hiding in a bunker just hours before the October 7th attack. Why is Israel releasing this footage now, more than a year after it allegedly happened? Well, to reinforce their original narrative that Sinwar was a coward who protected himself and his family and let ordinary Gazans die. Israel also highlighted some other things.
Last month, Sinwar's DNA was found on a piece of tissue he used, a few hundred meters from a tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were brutally executed in Tel Sultan in Rafah. Then Sinwar fled yet again.
So apparently Sinwar was surrounded by hostages whom he used as human shields and disposed of at his convenience. Then listen to this.
Killing Sinwar is the result of a year of operational and intelligence efforts to bring him and other Hamas leaders to justice.
He said Sinwar's death was the result of intelligence efforts. Do you remember the recent headlines? They called Sinwar's killing a stroke of luck. They said he was found by chance. Now, Israel wants to change that narrative as well, because it makes their intelligence services look weak, and Israel cannot afford to show any weakness. Also, did you notice something else? The Israeli spokesperson said all of what he did in English. So he wasn't speaking to the domestic audience. He was speaking to all of us, English speakers around the world. That message was directly from the IDF to us, to make sure that we are listening to their version of events. Israel does it quite well. It reaches out to its audience, its intended audience, directly. Let me show you another example. This is a post by the IDF's Arab spokesperson. He put that up in Arabic. And here's a rough translation of what he said. Did Sinwar's wife enter the tunnel with him on October 6, carrying a Birkin bag estimated to cost about $32,000? I leave the comment to you. While the people of Gaza do not have enough money for a tent or basic necessities, we see many examples of Yahya Sinwar and his wife's special love for money. The IDF says that Sinwar's wife has an Hermes Birkin bag, one that costs $32,000. Now, for our Indian audience, that's about 27 lakh rupees. Is it true? Is it really a Birkin, an Hermes Birkin? The story has divided the internet. The fact is, Birkins are not openly available to the public. People can't just enter a showroom and buy one. They need to be vetted first. The whole process is so tedious. There's even a class action lawsuit against Hermes. Of course, you can always buy a pre-owned bag, but critics say it's hard to imagine Sinwar's wife getting one. Plus, the Birkin that the IDF mentioned is quite large. The dimensions apparently are not right for an original bag. So the jury is still out on the Birkin. But there's no debate on why the IDF put out this story, and that too in Arabic. It was to undermine any new support for Yahya Sinwar, support that he gained in the Arab world after the video of his last moments was released. It's a fantastic example of how Israel fights the narrative war. We're waiting to see if they win this one. And speaking of narrative wars, Canada is waging one with India. Their Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is leading it. He wants the world to believe that India is some rogue state, killing dissidents abroad, using diplomats to spy and flouting international laws. But New Delhi is setting the record straight. It has fielded the man at the center of this controversy. I'm talking about Sanjay Verma, India's High Commissioner in Ottawa. Canada had declared him a person of interest in the Nijjar case. So in protest, India recalled him. But before leaving, he sat down for an interview. And he said two very important things. One, Khalistani extremists are Canadian assets. And two, Indian diplomats never spied on Canadians. Listen to this.
Khalistani extremists are being encouraged all the time. This is my allegation. I also know that some of these Khalistani extremists and terrorists are deep assets of Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Again, I'm not giving any evidence. It is all overt. There is nothing covert. It is all overt. We read the newspaper, we read their statements, we read their social media posts, and we infer from there.
The first claim is very serious. Sanjay Verma says Khalistanis work for Canada. They're Canadian assets. They're deep state assets. And their objective? Clearly to destabilize India. In the interview, Sanjay Verma also spoke about Hardeep Singh Nijjar's case. He said that he condemned any murder But he ruled out any Indian role in this case. As for the so-called evidence, he said there isn't any. He says Canada is yet to share any proof. Despite that, Canadian officials pushed on. Apparently, they wanted to question 6 Indian diplomats, the High Commissioner plus 5 others. Just one problem though, diplomats have legal immunity. You can't just call them up for questioning. So Canada asked India to waive their immunity to allow officials to question them, to allow Canadian officials to question the Indian diplomats. Again, no evidence given. Not even a reason for being named person of interest in this case. It tells you how baseless their investigation is. More like a witch hunt. If only they turn their focus elsewhere, perhaps to the United States, where the apostle of peace, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, is at it again. His latest sermon of harmony is out. He's threatening to blow up Indian airlines. That's right. Pannu says, don't fly Air India from November 1st to 19th. But why these dates? Well, they coincide with the anti-Sikh riots of 1984. So Pannu says if you fly on these dates, your life will be in danger. And it's not a new threat. This time last year, he issued the same warning, don't fly Air India. In December 2023, he threatened to attack the Indian Parliament. In January this year, he threatened to kill Punjab's Chief Minister. I must say, that's some serious activism there. A forceful use of free speech. And what are the Americans doing about it? Are they investigating him? Well, quite the opposite. They're investigating an alleged plot against Pannu. It involves a former Indian official. His name is Vikas Yadav. The US says he ordered the hit on Pannu. Now, Yadav is a wanted man in the US, so technically Washington can seek his extradition. What happens then? Will India hand him over? Well, they may not have to. You see, Vikas Yadav was arrested by Delhi police last year. Not in this case, in a totally different one. He faces charges of kidnapping and extortion. And right now he's out on bail. Until that case is settled, the one in India, Vikas Yadav cannot be extradited. And how long will that take for this case to be wrapped up? Well, we're talking about Indian courts, so it could be years or decades. In the meantime, expect Pannu to continue his activism. His non-violent appeals to blow up planes. India's foreign minister talked about this controversy today. He called it a clear double standard.
If you threaten the Indian High Commissioner, he is supposed to accept it as freedom of speech. But if an Indian journalist says the Canadian High Commissioner walked out of South Block looking very grumpy, it is apparently foreign interference.
We don't know how these cases will evolve, neither the Nijjar one nor the Pannu one, but one thing is quite clear, both cases have exposed Western hypocrisy. Just think about it. Pannu is openly threatening to attack Indian planes, to kill Indian politicians. In what world is this activism of freedom of speech? If an American plane was threatened, would the reaction be the same? In the past, they have jailed people for such threats, but no such action against Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. It's important to call out these double standards, to expose Western reality. If not, they will keep shaping the narrative around India.
My first day at McDonald's, I'm looking for a job. How much are you paying me? This is fun. I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again. Now I have worked at McDonald's. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here.
The golden arches behind me are one of America's most recognizable symbols. They stand for McDonald's, a fast food chain known for its value meals. But in the US, it represents more than just a meal. It embodies the American way of life. Nearly 9 out of 10 American households visited McDonald's in the last 1 year. 9 out of 10. You could say it's part of American culture now, which is why it is the new battleground for American politics too. We are 2 weeks away from the presidential election, and turns out McDonald's is the new swing state. On Sunday, Donald Trump made a pit stop there. He was in Philadelphia. He stopped at McDonald's. But this wasn't just for a quick meal or photos. Trump decided to get the real McDonald's experience, trading his signature suit for an apron.
My first day at McDonald's, I'm looking for a job.
Hello, President Trump. I'm Derek Jack and Tony. I'm the owner.
Well, that's a good owner. Must be a wealthy guy, huh? Thank you very much. Well, I'm looking for a job, and I've always wanted to work at McDonald's, but I never did. I'm running against somebody that said she did, but it turned out to be a totally phony story. So, if you don't mind, I want to work the French fry counter.
With the apron on, it was time for some real work. So Trump jumped into action. He took turns at the fryer, dunking baskets of fries into the oil. The process seemed to have fascinated him. It won't be a stretch to say he was loving it.
Never touched by a human hand. Nice and clean. I'm very superstitious.
Trump did not just stop at salting fries. He went all the way, serving customers through the drive-through window and even greeting some fans.
Oh, okay, great. This is all on Trump. Oh, hold on. I'm allowed to do that, right? Yeah. Let's check and make sure it's everything you said it would be. It better be. It's going to be the best yet. I made it myself. You're the man. Make America great. Thank you, man. Thank you. Hello. How are you? What a beautiful woman. Look at a beautiful child. It's like the perfect looking person. Thank you so much. You are not arguing. I can see.
We pray for you, and you are the type of person we want to be the president.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So nice. Thank you very much.
Mr. President,
yes.
Please don't let the United States become Brazil, my native Brazil.
Oh, we'll keep it good.
Please.
We're going to make it better than ever, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Trump and McDonald's, it's a love affair that goes back a few decades. In 2002, Donald Trump appeared in a McDonald's commercial endorsing a $1 burger. During his 2016 presidential campaign, it became his breakfast staple, an Egg McMuffin in the morning. Even in the White House, Trump did not let go of his McDonald's. The White House staff did make him burgers, but they weren't as good as his favorite Quarter Pounder. So his bodyguard had to often make a run to the nearby McDonald's. Clearly, it was his guilty pleasure, and Trump made it quite public, serving McDonald's meals at White House events. But why this stint now? Why did Donald Trump choose to suddenly don the apron? Well, the answer is Kamala Harris. Her campaign says that she worked at a McDonald's when she was in college. She worked the register, she manned the fry station, and it's a story that Harris has repeated multiple times. It's to highlight her middle-class upbringing. But the Republicans don't believe it. They think that she's lying.
Now I have worked at McDonald's. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here.
Guess it's not a battle for the White House anymore. It's a battle for who aced McDonald's. Harris says she did it first. Trump is salty about it. And he's gotten down to salting fries to prove otherwise.
This is fun. I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again.
Trump thinks the experience was a success, but did the voters think so? The reaction on the internet is mixed. Some love it, some are amused, and others are bewildered. Because this election season is throwing up a lot, from presidential fries to $1 million cash prize. Yes, you heard it right. $1 million. Elon Musk is giving away $1 million every day until November 5th. That's the day America goes to polls. The prize goes to a registered voter. So what's the catch here? Well, it isn't for just any voter. The person must sign a petition by Elon Musk's Super PAC. A PAC is a political action committee. This petition pledges support for free speech and gun rights. So the person must sign it, and they must be a registered voter from one of the 7 swing states in the US. Only then do they qualify for this lottery. The winner is chosen at random, and this person gets $1 million.
Every day from now until the election, we're giving out $1 million prize. And all you have to do is sign a petition in support of the Constitution. It's very straightforward. You don't even have to vote. You don't have to vote.
Now, all of this sounds too simple: register and win money. But is this even legal? Well, the US federal law prohibits bribery in elections. You cannot pay someone to register or vote. If you do, you can end up in prison for 5 years. Does that mean that Elon Musk is risking jail time? Well, not really, because there's a loophole here. Musk is technically paying people to sign up for a petition. He's not paying them to register or vote. So he could be safe from legal action. But the Democrats are questioning his intent. They say it is vote buying. Either way, with polls showing a close battle ahead, it looks like the billionaire is only raising the stakes. In India's Jammu and Kashmir, terrorism is rearing its ugly head again. 6 migrant workers and a doctor were killed in a terror attack. They were working on a tunnel project. The terrorists attacked their camp, cut the power supply and then opened fire at the workers. This is the worst attack targeting civilians in the region since June. The timing is no coincidence, though. Last month, Kashmir held its first election since 2014. The process was peaceful. A new government is now in place. Democracy is back in the valley. So these attacks are an attempt to undo the gains and derail Kashmir's progress. Our next report tells you more.
The workers had just returned from a long day at work. They sat down to eat. And that's when the attack took place. 2 terrorists opened fire at the camp. 6 workers were killed, and so was a doctor. It was one of the worst attacks targeting civilians in Jammu and Kashmir in recent months. The attack took place near Gagangir, located near the town of Sonmarg. The 6 killed were working on a tunnel project known as the Z-Mode Tunnel. It will connect Kashmir's Ganderbal district to Sonmarg. That way, there will be year-long connectivity as the current road closes during winters. Not just that, the project aims to provide all-weather connectivity from Srinagar to Ladakh. The incident took place in a deeply forested area. Officials say it was very well planned. The terrorists first approached the camp, then sabotaged the power lines, ensuring there was no electricity. Finally, opened fire on the workers and the doctor. Security forces arrived swiftly after the attack. The area has now been cordoned off. The army is conducting search operations to find the terrorists. Pakistan-backed the Resistance Front, or TRF, has claimed responsibility for the attack. It's an offshoot of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. The TRF was formed in 2019, and since then, it has been behind multiple attacks in Jammu and Kashmir. In 2023, India designated it as a terrorist organization. The latest attack comes just days after Jammu and Kashmir got a new government. Chief Minister Omar Abdullah has condemned the attack, calling it cowardly. His father, National Conference President Farooq Abdullah, also said that Kashmir will not become Pakistan. Union Home Minister Amit Shah also added that those responsible will face the harshest response.
इस हमले की जितनी निंदा की जाए, जितना इसके खिलाफ बोला जाए कम है। बेगुनाहों के खिलाफ इस तरह तशद्दुद का इस्तेमाल ये कहां से जायज़ है और इससे हासिल क्या होगा? पिछले 35 साल से तो हम ये देखते आए हैं, लेकिन जम्मू कश्मीर में कुछ नहीं बदला। जो जम्मू कश्मीर के लिए मिलेगा वो पुरअमन एक माहौल में मिलेगा।
Now, this is the second attack on migrants since the new government was sworn in, and the third such incident this year. On Friday, the body of a migrant worker from Bihar was recovered. It was riddled with bullet wounds. Not just that, terror attacks have been on the rise in the region in recent months. On May 4th, 1 soldier was killed after terrorists attacked an Air Force convoy. On June 9th, 9 pilgrims were killed after terrorists attacked their bus. On June 24th, 2 soldiers were injured in an encounter. On July 8th, 5 soldiers were killed in an ambush. On July 15th, 4 soldiers were killed in another terror attack. And now this. This year, Kashmir had its first election since 2014, the first since Article 370 was removed. The elections were peaceful, but cross-border terrorism has been bleeding Kashmir for long, because these attacks not only threaten its peace, but also its progress.
Our next story is from Australia. Britain's King Charles III is in the country right now. He arrived in Australia on Friday to kick off a ceremonial royal tour. He isn't just sightseeing, he's technically on an official visit as Australia's head of state. That's right, even today, Britain's monarch is Australia's sovereign, even though the year is 2024. Somehow Charles is King of Australia as well. His trip started out simple enough. He was given the red carpet treatment. He met top government officials and even interacted with fans of the monarchy. But then today, he visited the Australian Parliament and things got heated. Take a look.
Give us what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land. Give us a treaty. This is not your land. This is not your land. You are not my kids. You are not our kids.
That was an Australian senator. Her name is Lydia Thorpe. She is an Indigenous Australian and she was quite vocal about her opinion of Charles and the British monarchy in general. She spoke her mind before being escorted out by the police. The senator has been facing heat after her demonstration and for sharing a distasteful image on social media. Some of her peers have called her embarrassing and rude. Others went further, calling her disrespectful and asking her to resign, but the senator is unlikely to back down.
I did it for truth-telling, global truth-telling about the royals who caused so much devastation to not only our people in this country, but Indigenous people around the world.
This isn't Thorpe's first high-profile protest. In 2022, she made headlines while taking her oath as senator. In Australia, you see, parliamentarians have to swear loyalty to the British monarch. That's how they take their oath. At that time, it was Elizabeth II when she took oath, and the senator referred to her as the colonizing Queen Elizabeth. So today's demonstration was a continuation of that sentiment. She highlighted the plight of her people. Indigenous Australians were basically overpowered and subjugated. There weren't any negotiations. The British came in, destroyed Indigenous communities and grabbed their land and made Australia a prison colony. Eventually, those prisoners and their guards became masters of the land, whereas Indigenous Australians became second-class citizens. So obviously, this Indigenous senator is not a fan of the British, and especially the British monarchy. Her demonstrations were criticised by some people, but she also received support, even in England.
Well, I think it's fair enough, to be perfectly honest. I think that royals should be greeted by protest wherever they go, and we've been doing that around the UK since the start of last year.
That was the head of a British pressure group. It's called Republic. The group is pushing for an end to the monarchy and transforming the UK into a true republic. Australia has these groups too. In fact, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is a prominent Republican. Albanese wanted to push for a republic initially, but in Australia, that means holding a nationwide referendum. That's the only way to change the country's constitution, through a referendum, and give Charles the boot. But right now, Australians would not appreciate a referendum. It costs a lot of money to hold one. And the average Australian is dealing with a cost of living crisis. The government knows that a referendum will be seen as wasteful expenditure, so they've put the plan on hold, at least until public sentiment improves. After all, they don't want the referendum to fail, like the last one, which was held in 1999. The last referendum extended the British monarchy's tenure by 25 years and counting. So they need to time the next one right. In the meantime, Charles will enjoy his status as head of state there, a status he did not earn but inherited. He may not have to worry about getting ousted, but he should expect more protests. And he shouldn't complain. After all, his ancestors did far worse. Now let's turn our attention to India. When it comes to wealth generation, the world's most populous nation is racing forward. In the financial year ending 2023, about 230,000 Indians reported an income of more than 1 crore rupees, 230,000. That's a 5-time increase within the past decade. It's a sign of better compliance and a higher number of business people. Why is that? And what does this mean for India? Our next report brings you the details.
44,078. That's how many Indians disclosed an annual income of 1 crore rupees, or about $118,000 a decade ago. Slightly more than 44,000. Do you know where that number stands now? Just under 230,000. 230,000 Indians have reported a taxable income of at least 1 crore rupees. That's a 5-time increase in the past decade, and it was disclosed by India's tax department. In India, people file income tax returns or ITR if their taxable income exceeds the basic exemption limit and according to the latest data by the department. Now, you may be wondering, who are these people? What share do salaried individuals make? 52% in the financial year ending in 2023, as compared to 49.2% in the last assessment year, and 51% for the financial year ending in 2013. So for the past decade, the number has not changed much. Experts say that the increase in wealth, the 5 times rise, points to the presence of more business people. Let's show you why. Let's look at the bigger numbers. Take, for instance, the annual taxable income exceeding 500 crore. 23 individuals reported earning this. None of them was receiving a salary. Or look at the 100 to 500 crore income bracket. 262 Indians fall in this category, out of which only 19 were earning a salary. So, where there's big money, there's business. And India is witnessing an extraordinary surge in wealth. Last year, the world's most populated nation created a new billionaire every 5 days. Now, there are at least 1,539 ultra-wealthy individuals in India. That's an increase of 220 from the year before, including individuals with wealth exceeding 1,000 crore rupees. The total wealth of these ultra-rich makes up more than half of India's national GDP, and it exceeds the combined GDP of Saudi Arabia and Switzerland. Of course, this is good news for India. India is outpacing other economies. But this comes with a dark side as well. India's top 1% own more than 40% of its total wealth, which means the country has a huge wealth gap. So, while there is work to be done towards reducing this inequality, when it comes to wealth generation, India is racing forward, and it shows no signs of stopping.
Now let's turn our focus to Europe, to a country in the east called Moldova. Moldova is located between Romania and Ukraine. It is home to about 3 million people. Most of the locals are ethnically Romanians, but there's a sizable Russian minority as well. Yesterday, Moldova went to polls. It was a twin election. People voted for 2 things, a new president and a constitutional change. Now, the presidential election was inconclusive. A second round needs to be held for that. But the people of Moldova have chosen to amend their constitution and permanently enshrine a goal: joining the European Union. As you can imagine, Russia is not happy about this. Our next report tells you why.
Moldova has charted out its next course. The country has officially decided to join the European Union. This isn't some political pledge or mere wishful thinking. Moldovans actually voted for this. They held a referendum on Sunday and chose to enshrine EU membership in their constitution.
According to preliminary data, 50.16% of voters who participated in the referendum voted yes to the question put to the referendum, and 49.84% answered no.
That's a razor-thin margin, not even 51%. It shows just how divided Moldova is.
We do not need the European Union. What we need is Moldova standing on its own feet. That's what I want to say. It is insane, all this European Union craze. I do not get it.
Almost half the people don't want to join the EU. They would rather stay out, or perhaps even turn to an old partner instead. For about 280 years, Moldova was under Russian rule, first as part of the Russian Empire and then as a member of the Soviet Union. Moldova gained its independence in 1991, but it was still within Moscow's sphere of influence. The EU thinks Russia is still influencing Moldova, and they meddled in yesterday's polls.
Well, we were watching very closely the votes, both votes, the referendum and the presidential elections in Moldova. Moldova is a very important partner of the European Union. We noted that this vote took place under unprecedented interference and intimidation by Russia and its proxies, aiming to destabilize the democratic processes in the Republic of Moldova.
This view was echoed by Moldova's president, Maia Sandu. Sandu's name was also on the ballot yesterday. There was a second vote being held simultaneously, Moldova's presidential election. Sandu was trying to get re-elected, and she had hitched her wagon to the EU referendum. So, went down to the wire, Sandu lashed out.
Moldova faced today, and in recent months, an unprecedented attack on freedom and democracy in our country. Criminal groups together with foreign forces, hostile to our interests, have attacked our country with tens of millions of euros, lies and propaganda with the most miserable means to bring our citizens and our country into an area of uncertainty and instability.
She accused criminal groups of meddling in the election. In particular, her government blames a fugitive tycoon with alleged links to Russia. Moscow denies this, of course. In fact, Moscow says the opposite happened. They say the elections were not free, and they raised a number of questions. Russia has also asked Moldova to provide proof of any rigging. Will Sandu do that? After all, her referendum went through. She's in the second round of the presidential election. It'll be held on the 3rd of November. And Sandu has a sizable lead over her closest opponent. So, Sandu might just choose to ignore the Russian allegations and focus on her re-election campaign. Moldova has now chosen a new path. It is now committed to joining the EU and distancing itself from Russia. But will Moscow allow this?
On October 9th, South Korea celebrated Hangul, marking the invention of the Korean alphabet. And the next day, on October 10th, millions came together to do something they had never done before. They read books by a Nobel Prize winner in their native language. Since then, the Han Kang effect has been sweeping Korea. It is named after the South Korean writer Han Kang. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature on the 10th of October this year and made history. She became the first Korean and the first Asian woman to win the prize. Now, Han's work often addresses historical traumas. It delves into mental and physical suffering. So her books were generally not considered everyone's cup of tea, that is, until her Nobel win. Now, queues of customers are spilling out of South Korean bookstores, and online bookstore websites are crashing because everyone wants to get their hands on Han's work. More than 1 million copies of her books have been sold, and sales are expected to surpass the 2 million mark by the end of this month, which would be a record in Korean publishing history. And a rare instance if you look at the bigger picture. Reading has been on the decline in South Korea. Nearly 6 out of 10 people read less than 1 book in a year. And this is a historic low since the government started maintaining readership data in 1994. But now, Han has single-handedly changed the reading landscape of South Korea. The Han Kang effect is reviving the book market. It has spurred a significant nationwide reading boom. Domestic libraries are seeing a surge of footfall. Han's books are the most borrowed now. Her bestseller, The Vegetarian, jumped from 166th national ranking to 1st. And Human Acts, which is also a book by her, from 178th to the 2nd position. Korea's online bookstores are witnessing their annual high as well. One online store saw a 1,200-fold increase in sales of Han's books. And the momentum is not limited to her. She is boosting the sale of Korean literature as a whole. It has increased by more than 12 times compared to last year. So after K-pop, K-dramas and K-movies, the world is witnessing an awakening appetite for Korean literature. And this is welcome change. You see, reading is great for us and the reasons are obvious. Knowledge boost, greater exposure, better language skills, stronger brain activity and decrease in stress and anxiety. Yet reading is on the decline. For instance, 23% Americans do not read for pleasure. Neither do 24% Britons. Now, there are outliers, of course. By global standards, Indians are avid readers, with more than 10 hours of reading each week, followed by Thailand and China. But globally, reading is on the decline, even among children, with 43% saying they like reading in free time. So what is the solution? Can the world get its own Han Kang effect? Realistically, it's tough, but research shows that some events can spur a reading boom. Unsurprisingly, social media plays a significant role. Have you heard of Book Talk? It is boosting readership among the young. But all book love bugs do not come with chirpy narrations and peppy music. Some reasons lie on the darker side, like the cost of living crisis. Last year, publishing houses like Bloomsbury saw a surge. Sales of children's books rose by 17% because people were looking for cheaper forms of entertainment. Plus, readers needed an escape amid the wars and political turmoil. Horror fiction had a moment. Last year, its sales rose by 54%. Experts claim this is because gory, dystopian or scary books reflect the world that we live in. They mirror real horrors, making them a relatable escape. Meanwhile, the pandemic also boosted book sales. During the lockdowns, people rediscovered their love for reading. In 2020, the US book industry grew by 9.7%, and in the UK, it was 16%. Who knew a reading slump could be this stubborn, with life-altering events like wars or pandemics getting us out of it? But maybe there is hope. Han Kang proves that there is another way, and we are here for it. Indian social media is obsessed with a new business deal. It involves two very unlikely partners, a movie production house and a vaccine maker. Both are household names in India. You may have heard of Karan Johar's Dharma Productions. He sold 50% of his company for 1,000 crore rupees. The buyer is Adar Poonawalla, the owner of Serum Institute of India. It's the biggest vaccine-making company in the world. It became famous during the pandemic because Serum Institute was making Covishield vaccine in India. Imagine them buying Dharma. It's a joke that writes itself. Take a look. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Australia, an alpaca sneezes on King Charles during a meet and greet event. In India, a Chennai beach lights up with bioluminescent waves, and hundreds dressed as zombies take over the streets of Chile in an annual zombie walk. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1994, the US and North Korea signed a landmark deal. It was called the Agreed Framework. North Korea agreed to freeze its existing nuclear program. Both countries promised normalization of relations. The deal collapsed in 2002 when the US accused Pyongyang of secretly continuing its nuclear program. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Donald Trump, make sure he does face a consequence, and that'll be at the ballot box in November.
Kamala mentioned my name, I think, 21 times. She didn't mention the border. She didn't mention inflation. She didn't mention anything but my name over and over and over again.
The countdown to the 5th of November is on, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump vying for the Oval Office. So, who will become America's next president? While around 240 million people will vote to pick the United States' 47th Commander-in-Chief, a relatively small number of them are likely to settle this pivotal question. A handful of the 50 states could hold the key to the White House. These are called the swing states. As the name goes, they could swing either Democrat or Republican. They're also known as battleground states or purple states. They could potentially be won by either candidate. So parties tend to spend disproportionate amount of time, resources and energy on bagging these states. One way to identify swing states is political realignment, and the other is tight margins in races. In 2020, the states that voted for current President Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, but chose former Republican President Donald Trump in 2016, have been highlighted as swing states. They are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These 5 states, along with North Carolina and Nevada, were won by a margin of 3 percentage points or less. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's campaigns have been at full throttle to win over the voters in these states. Let's look at each swing state in the 2024 US presidential election. Arizona, also known as the Grand Canyon State. In the 2020 race, Arizona, for the first time since 1996, voted to back a Democrat. For decades, the state has been characterized as red, but Joe Biden flipped it by about 10,000 votes in 2020. The state borders Mexico, so it has been at the center of a raging immigration debate. The issue has been a top concern among voters. Though border crossings have fallen in recent months, they hit a record high in December 2023 and January 2024. But Donald Trump has repeatedly attacked Vice President Harris on the current administration's record on immigration. The former US president has also promised the largest deportation operation in US history if he's back in the White House. Apart from immigration, abortion access has also left Arizona divided. State Republicans attempted to bring back a 160-year-old near-complete ban on terminating pregnancies, but the move was foiled. Next up is Georgia, the Peach State. It's a critical battleground state for both leaders as they struggle to gain the voters' attention. In 2020, Joe Biden flipped the state, which was held by the Republicans since 1996. Biden won the state by a 0.2% margin. Though the margin was too little to call it a decisive win, it was key to Biden's path to the presidency. It was here in Georgia's Fulton County where Donald Trump was accused of election interference, landing him in one of his 4 criminal prosecutions. Trump and 18 others have been accused of conspiring to overturn the narrow defeat in the state. He, however, denies any wrongdoing. A third of Georgia's population is African American. The state has one of the country's largest proportions of black residents. Analysts say this demographic was pivotal in Joe Biden flipping the state in the last election. Moving now to Michigan, the Great Lakes state. It has picked the winning presidential candidate in the last 2 elections. Michigan had been reliably blue since 1992 after voting exclusively Republican in the 1970s and 80s. But in 2016, it turned into a major battleground after Trump won there by less than 11,000 votes. In 2020, Joe Biden swung the state back to blue with a wider margin. But currently, the state has become symbolic of countrywide anger against President Biden due to his support for Israel in its war against Gaza. During the Michigan Democratic primary contest in February, when Joe Biden was still running for a second term in office, over 100,000 voters chose uncommitted on their ballots. Kamala Harris has taken a slightly tougher stance on Israel. But whether it will be enough to change the voters' minds, well, we'll find out in November. Next is Nevada. The Silver State has been a more traditional example of a swing state. In the last 4 elections, the state voted blue. But Nevada voted Republican from the 1960s through the early 2000s. The only exception was Bill Clinton, who won the state in 1992 and again in 1996. Experts say there are signs of a possible return to its Republican roots. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are hoping to win the state's sizable Latino population. Unemployment is also one of the major concerns here. The state has the highest unemployment rate in the US at 5.1% after California and the District of Columbia. Then there's North Carolina, the Tar Heel state of the old North state. Since 1980, it has voted Republican in every single election except 2008, choosing Barack Obama. In recent presidential contests, the victory margins have been razor thin. In 2020, the victory margin in North Carolina was just 1.3%. Poll pundits say it will be a toss-up in November, since the race is extremely tight with no clear winner. The 6th on the list of swing states is Pennsylvania. With 19 electoral votes, it's the most important swing state this November. The Keystone State clinched the presidency for Joe Biden in 2020. The big question is, can Kamala Harris keep it blue? Both sides have campaigned hard in the state. Donald Trump even survived an assassination attempt here after a bullet dodged past him and hurt his ear. Donald Trump broke the blue streak in the state with his 2016 victory. But 4 years later, in 2020, Biden secured a blue wall that also included Michigan and Wisconsin. Now Trump is hoping to lure Pennsylvania voters back. The 7th and final one is Wisconsin, the Badger State. It also picked the winning candidate in both the 2016 and 2020 elections, but only by a margin of around 20,000 votes each time. Since 1988, Wisconsin had been a reliably blue Rust Belt state. Trump broke that streak in 2016 and turned it red. Analysts say it's states like Wisconsin where an impact could be made by third-party candidates. Among them is Green Party's Jill Stein. The Democrats have been fighting to remove her from the ballot in Wisconsin, saying that the Green Party did not comply with the state election laws. Republican candidate Donald Trump has described the state as really important. He said, and I quote, If we win Wisconsin, we win the whole thing. The Republican National Convention was held in Milwaukee. Kamala Harris was also rallying in the same city when the Democratic Convention nominated her as their presidential candidate. In the United States, when a sitting president is up for a re-election, fewer states tend to change parties. In the past 8 US presidential elections, the 1992 election had the highest number of states that switched sides. 22 states flipped. It's often called the year of political realignment, when Democrat Bill Clinton defeated incumbent President George H. Bush. In 1992, states including Colorado, Maryland, and even California, which had voted Republican for years, chose to go blue, and then reliably stayed that way for the next decade. Can 2024 be another year of political realignment in US history? Well, we'll find out on the 5th of November.
On the 5th of November, millions of voters in the United States will cast their ballot to elect their next president. However, there's a catch. The world's oldest democracy does not hold elections which can be considered as the easiest to understand. In fact, the American voting system is quite complicated. Now, most democracies in the world follow something that's called the popular vote, where voters directly cast their ballots to a political party or leader. It's a direct transfer of the vote from the voter to whoever is on the ballot. But the United States does not follow this. In fact, it's the only democracy in the world that has an indirect voting system called the Electoral College. Simply put, the Electoral College is a process of voting. It's not really a college. It was established in 1787 AD and was included in the US Constitution by the Founding Fathers. The Electoral College is basically the selection of electors who are called delegates. On the 5th of November, when Americans will queue up to vote, they won't actually be voting for their next president. Instead, they'll actually be voting for delegates who represent their respective states, and these delegates will then vote for the president. So, how does the Electoral College work? The Electoral College is made up of 538 delegates. You must be wondering where the number 538 comes from. It's the number of senators and representatives from each of the 50 states. The breakdown of 538 includes exactly 100 senators, 2 from each state, and 438 representatives from the 50 states. Each state's number of representatives is based on its population. Let's take a closer look with an example. California and Texas are the two most populous states, and so they have a higher number of representatives. However, regardless of the population of the states, each of them gets 3 votes to start with. The remaining are then added depending on the population of the state. However, that does not mean that the states with a higher population enjoy more voting rights. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. Let's take the example of 2 states. The population of Texas is over 29 million. On the other hand, Alaska has a much smaller population of just above 700,000. However, each representative from Texas and Alaska roughly represents the same proportion of the population. So, as Texas gets 38 representatives in the US Congress, Alaska gets 3. And this makes voting different in Texas and Alaska, because each of the 38 delegates from Texas now represent roughly over 760,000 people. Meanwhile, each delegate from Alaska represents over 250,000 people. Basically, it takes 760,000 people from Texas to get 1 vote, but it just takes 250,000 people from Alaska to get that same 1 vote. So the vote in Alaska can be considered a lot more influential. When Americans go to polls in November, they aren't exactly voting for the president directly, but their state's representatives, whether that's Democrat or Republican. And then these delegates give their votes to the presidential candidate from their party. Whichever candidate then wins the majority in a state, no matter how big or small it may be, wins all the electoral votes of that state. And in total, to win the race to the Oval Office, a candidate must win 270 and more votes across 50 states. So when Americans say this,
I love her. I am so glad to see a presidential nominee who is youthful and joyful, and I think that reflects right back onto the Democrats. My first time voting in a presidential election, and I could not be happier.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I know the last election, I think Trump got like 88 or 90% of the vote here. I think he's going to get that again.
The courts will take care of that. Let's take care of him in November.
what they really mean is that they will vote for the delegates who represent their political party. And then, those delegates will vote for the presidential candidate from their respective parties.
Kamala, you are fired! You're fired! Get out! Get out!
It's time to turn the page.
However, the delegates don't have to necessarily vote for the candidate that the population wants to give its vote to. In fact, electors are free to vote against the wishes of the people. And this is despite having been elected as a delegate by the voters. So, with how complex the electoral system is, should the US continue with it, or adapt the much simpler popular voting system? A survey from 2023 shows that a majority of Americans want to do away with the Electoral College. A Pew Research study shows that nearly 2/3 of US citizens want popular voting. Americans say that it would truly reflect the mood of the nation for who should sit in the Oval Office. That's because a presidential candidate could win the popular vote, which means that more people voted for them, but they could lose the presidential race due to the Electoral College, where the victor is decided by the number of delegates and not the votes of the people. The Pew study has some more insights on the issue. It says that Democrats are far more likely than Republicans to support moving to the popular vote. On aggregate, over 80% of Democrats say that they would like to have the popular voting system in America. In contrast, about 45% of Republicans share the same sentiments. Moving away from party ideologies and towards demographies, almost 70% of Americans under the age of 50 prefer the popular vote. On the other hand, Americans who are 65 and older want the Electoral College to continue.
A very nice call from Kamala.
The current system allows a candidate to lose the popular vote but still win the Electoral College. This occurred both in the 2000 and the 2016 elections, which were won by George W. Bush and Donald Trump respectively. However, the only way to change the Electoral College would be through a constitutional amendment. But amending the Constitution is a Herculean task. The last time it was done was in the year 1992, and it was about raising salaries for congressional lawmakers. So, for now, it looks like Americans will have to keep voting using the Electoral College to elect their president.
As borders are, Kamala threw open our borders and allowed 20 million illegal aliens to stampede into our country from all over the world.
Every U.S. citizen has the right to vote. And this year, every eligible voter's ballot will decide who will be the next U.S. president. The 2024 race for the White House will see over 200 million Americans cast their vote.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
However, there are over 350 million people living in the United States. So why isn't the number of eligible voters higher? And is voting restricted only to American citizens? Voting is a fundamental and guaranteed right to citizens of the United States. Only they are allowed to cast their ballot to be eligible. Here's what the requirements are. A person has to be a U.S. citizen. This could be through birth in the US, through birth overseas to parents who are US citizens. Then there is the process of naturalization. It is the process of voluntarily becoming a US citizen, and then you also have to be 18 years and older on voting day. If you meet these requirements, then you may register to become a voter and cast your ballot in the US elections. So US citizens can cast their vote and pick their next president. They can also pick their governors and mayors by voting in the state and local elections. But what about those who are not US citizens but are living in the country? This includes people who are in America on work visas or those who have acquired lawful permanent resident status, also known as green cards. But what about the 50 million international tourists and the 1 million plus international students? And millions of illegal migrants? Can these people also cast their vote? Here's what the rules say. Lawful permanent residents or green card holders cannot vote in the federal elections. This includes the presidential, Senate and House of Representatives races. Additionally, green card holders also cannot vote in state elections. That's because most US states follow federal law. However, green card holders can exercise their voting rights in certain towns and cities where local law allows them to vote. States like Maryland and Vermont allow green card holders to vote. However, US federal law allows green card holders to participate in other political activity. This can include volunteering in political campaigns or advocating for social issues. And what about the others? Well, apart from green card holders, international tourists, students, people on work visas or illegal migrants cannot cast their ballot in either the federal, state, or local elections. However, they can take part in political events and campaigns, but only as volunteers. This brings us to the question, why is citizenship and voting a raging debate in the United States? It all started in February, when Tesla CEO and tech billionaire Elon Musk sparked a debate on his social media platform X. He questioned US President Joe Biden's migration policy. Musk said that Biden purposely had weak borders so that millions of illegal migrants could enter the US. Musk added that the Biden administration would fast-track citizenship for those migrants and create a permanent majority, a one-party state. The billionaire said that this was the strategy of the Democrats to ensure that they win the 2024 presidential race. Musk's tweet was not taken seriously at the time, but that all changed in June, when Joe Biden announced that he would give citizenship to 500,000 people who are undocumented spouses of Americans but have been living in the United States for over 10 years and more.
Today I'm announcing a common sense fix to streamline the process for obtaining legal status for immigrants.
And that's when the Republicans jumped on the matter. At least 16 Republican states are suing the Biden administration for this move. Elon Musk says the Democrats are importing voters. The Republican-led states argue that Biden has bypassed congressional laws to fast-track citizenship for blatant political purposes. However, the Democrats have hit back. Vice President Kamala Harris has called it Republican strategy to tear apart families. Harris has accused the Republicans of hindering the process of legalizing the migrant status of millions.
Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security, and here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law.
This brings us to the question, how easy is it to get voting rights as a migrant? And will Biden's citizenship policy benefit the Democrats? Joe Biden's citizenship eligibility program for spouses has crucial details about becoming a citizen. The program allows undocumented spouses of Americans who have lived in the U.S. for at least 10 years or more as of June 17, 2024. To apply for citizenship, they should have no criminal history and will have to provide extensive documentation of taxes and their marital status. Once the application is approved, the qualifying applicant will have 3 years to obtain a green card or risk deportation, and after getting a green card they can apply for naturalization or full U.S. citizenship. This means that the almost 500,000 spouses of Americans will not be eligible to vote in this year's election. However, the Democrats are being criticized for pulling this move in an election year, which is in stark contrast to Donald Trump's proposal of mass deportations.
We will do large deportations.
Additionally, the path to U.S. citizenship takes roughly a decade. So the influx of immigrants during Biden's tenure will also not have a direct impact in this year's election. However, it will steer how Americans will vote this year, with border security remaining one of the top concerns. Meanwhile, both Elon Musk and Donald Trump continue to claim that the Democrats are signing up illegal migrants onto voter lists, even though they have not come forward with any evidence for their claims. Additionally, there is not enough research on whether migrants who get U.S. citizenship prefer to vote for Democrats or Republicans. So the fact still remains, despite these wild claims, that only American citizens choose their president.
On the 5th of November 2024, millions across all 50 states in the United States will vote to pick their next president. In the U.S., the winner is not the candidate who gets the most votes across the country, which is the popular vote. Instead, both candidates compete to win contests across the 50 states. But over years, electorates in some of these states have been good reflectors of the voting behavior of the entire country. These states are called the bellwether states. They tend to reliably match the countrywide outcome of the presidential election. So, candidates favored in the bellwether states mostly end up winning the election. These states are Ohio, Nevada, New Mexico, Florida, Colorado, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. Let's begin with Ohio, the Buckeye State. It has historically been a bellwether state and continues to hold on to that status. The candidate who wins Ohio usually has a very good chance of spending the next 4 years in the Oval Office. The state holds the highest bellwether percentage at 90.9%. It has held that status for 14 presidential election cycles, across 60 years, from Lyndon Johnson's landslide win in 1964 to Donald Trump's victory in 2016. Ohio's choice won the Electoral College in every election. It held the longest streak of a bellwether state, until 2020, when the Buckeye State recorded its first miss. It gave a majority of its vote to then-incumbent President Donald Trump. The former president had an 8-point margin of victory in the state, but Trump still lost to Joe Biden in the national vote and Electoral College. Next is Nevada, the Silver State, and the only other state of all the bellwether states to compete with Ohio's record. Nevada shares the bellwether percentage with Ohio at 90.9%. Since 1976, Democratic and Republican candidates have won Nevada 6 times each, and the winner in Nevada has gone to the White House in 10 of the last 12 elections. But just like Ohio, Nevada too has had one miss since 1980. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the state over Donald Trump, who won the presidential election.
Instead of taking charge that night, Hillary Clinton decided to go home and sleep. Incredible.
In 2020, the state was back to its winning ways, when Joe Biden carried the state. The state has just 6 electoral votes, but no presidential candidate ever been able to take the Silver State for granted, because it's also a swing state. The third is New Mexico. It has a bellwether percentage of 81.8%. Since the 1980s, it has only gone wrong twice in calling the election. In the year 2000, the state sided with Al Gore over George W. Bush, with a vote margin of just 366 votes.
I mean, I'm sure there's some people in this state that say, I don't like George W. because who his dad is. Very few are saying they don't like George W. because who my mother is, by the way.
In the year 2016, Hillary Clinton carried the state, while Donald Trump won the presidency. If we consider statistics from the year 1912, which is when New Mexico became a state, then the number of misfires for New Mexico goes up to 3. In 1976, New Mexico picked the incumbent Gerald Ford, but Democrat Jimmy Carter won the presidency. Fourth bellwether state is Florida. The Sunshine State also has an impressive record. With an overall bellwether percentage of 81.8%, Florida has only gotten it wrong twice since 1980. Once in 1992, when it voted for incumbent George H. Bush, and Bill Clinton won the presidency.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And in 2020, when the state voted red, backing Donald Trump, but Democrat Joe Biden swept the presidential election. Next is Colorado. The Centennial State is also high on the list of bellwether states. Colorado's bellwether percentage stands at 81.8%. This state too has had 2 misfires in the last 43 years. Like Florida, Colorado too backed George H. Bush in 1992, and the state voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. But Donald Trump pulled off a massive upset. Sixth is New Hampshire. The Granite State shares its bellwether percentage with Colorado at 81.8%. The 2 misses on its record are from the year 2004 and 2016, when incumbent President George W. Bush won a second term in office, but New Hampshire picked Democrat John Kerry. And in 2016, when the state threw its weight behind Hillary Clinton.
Thank you so much!
The 7th and last on the list is Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. It also a bellwether percentage of 81.8%, but the state had back-to-back failures in the year 2000 and 2004. It rejected George W. Bush in 2 consecutive presidential elections, voting for Al Gore in the year 2000 and John Kerry in 2004. Pennsylvania chose blue, but Bush left it red-faced. With 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania is also a swing state. The United States also has 19 bellwether counties across 50 states. From 1980 to 2016, these 19 counties have voted for the winner of the presidential election, every single time. In fact, Valencia County in New Mexico has had the most impressive feat. It has been voting for the winner since 1952. But the 2020 presidential election was a blot on their record. 18 out of the 19 bellwether counties got it wrong that year. They voted for former President Donald Trump. They backed him not marginally but in huge numbers. But Joe Biden won the presidency. The only one whose record was intact was Clallam County in Washington, that voted for Biden. So which way will these counties and states go this November? Will they help Donald Trump return to the Oval Office?
From the day I take the oath of office,
or will they ensure Kamala Harris scripts history by becoming the first female president of the United States?
It was the same old show. Same old tired playbook we've heard for years.
On November 5th, as voting gets underway in America,
A quick reminder. Vote!
all eyes will be on these 7 bellwether states and the 19 counties to indicate which way the wind is blowing.
On November 5th, all eyes will be on America. The country will head to the ballot box, and they have a choice to make: Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Who will the United States choose?
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
I am running to be President for all of America, not half of America.
Now, no one can predict the election results. We will only know when it's declared. But behind the votes, there's another story. A story of numbers, statistics, and predictions. The story of polls. We hear about them during every presidential election. In some states, Donald Trump is leading. In the others, it's Kamala Harris. These polls are crucial to each election. They shape narratives. They influence campaigns. And sometimes, they even leave the entire nation baffled. In 2016 and 2020, the polls got it wrong. Can they get it right this time? And what do these opinion polls mean for the American democracy? The year was 1948. The date was November 3rd. This was the front page of the Chicago Daily Tribune. It read, "Dewey defeats Truman." But here's the catch. Thomas E. Dewey did not win that election. Harry S. Truman did. So, why did the paper print that headline? A year before the elections, the Chicago Daily Tribune had changed the way it printed its paper. So, the copy needed to go to print earlier. That was the case, too, on that night. Most states had not declared their results, but the paper took a leap of faith. After all, every poll said that Dewey would win. So, they went ahead with this copy. It went to press. But by next morning, it was a completely different result. The polls predicted a Dewey win. Instead, it was a Truman triumph. He even posed with the Chicago Daily Tribune copy. Now, polling has been a part of American elections for over a century. It started with simple straw polls. As technology advanced, so did the methods. Now, they are complex statistical analyses. So, how do the polls work? It's all about three things: data, sampling, and the art of asking the right questions. At its core, a poll is a survey. It's a way to measure the opinions of a specific group. But in a country as large and diverse as the United States, it's impossible to ask everyone. So, pollsters rely on sampling. Age, gender, race, location. These are all factors that are considered before building a sample. Then, there are the methods. How do you contact the sample group? Pollsters use landlines, cell phones, and online surveys. Each method has its advantages and drawbacks. More importantly, each one can influence the outcome of the poll. For example, imagine it's an online survey. Chances are the answers will come from a younger generation. Also, chances are they will be more educated. So, pollsters must keep that in mind. Once the data is collected, it's analyzed. It is then adjusted for various factors like non-response bias, which occurs when survey participants either can't or won't respond to a survey question. Finally, it is presented to the public as the polls that we see. So it's a science, but one with inherent uncertainties. Take 1980, for example. Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan. Polls predicted a close race. However, Reagan won by a landslide. So, why did the polls go wrong? It's the voter sentiment in the end. Reagan performed well in the presidential debate that was held a week before the election. It convinced many undecided voters. They ended up voting for him, and the polls completely missed this. Then there's 2000, George W. Bush versus Al Gore. Many polls predicted an Al Gore win. Now, while Gore did win the popular vote, the outcome depended on the Electoral College. Polls underestimated that. It did not take into consideration the razor-thin margins in key states. So it was a blot on the reputation of polls. But 2016 really changed the game. It's when America woke up to how wrong these polls could be. Polls predicted an overwhelming victory for Hillary Clinton. Yet on election night, Donald Trump emerged as the 45th president of the United States. So what went wrong? Well, there are several factors at play. The first was the underestimation of Trump's support in key battleground states. Pollsters missed crucial pockets of voters. That's the rural, white working class. They turned out in larger numbers than expected. The second was education levels. Non-educated voters weren't well represented in the samples, and they turned out to be pivotal in Trump's victory. The third was late deciding voters, those who swung towards Trump in the final days of the campaign. Polls didn't capture this last-minute shift. But here was the biggest issue: the failure to account for this shy Trump voter. These voters supported Trump, but were reluctant to declare it. Hillary may have lost the election, but the biggest loser of 2016 were the pollsters. So 4 years later, the polling industry vowed to learn from its mistakes. In 2020, the polls once again predicted a clear winner. It was Joe Biden. This time, the prediction was correct, but there was an issue. The margin was far narrower than expected. Despite making adjustments, pollsters underestimated Trump's support again. The problems were the same as 2016. So, what will it be in 2024? Pollsters are now looking at new technologies: AI, big data, and social media analytics. They want to use it to improve accuracy. But will it be enough? Will pollsters get it right this time? Or will they be wrong for the third time? Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear. Polls will remain a critical part of the presidential elections, but they are not infallible. And in the end, it's the people, not the polls, who ultimately decide who will be in the White House.
If there's one thing the year 2024 will be remembered for, it'll be elections. From India to Britain, the European Union to South Korea, South Africa, Finland, France, Taiwan, and even Russia. Over 60 nations held elections this year. However, it's not over yet. One last global election remains. And it's just around the corner. The United States. The world's oldest modern democracy is set to vote this November. Americans will be choosing their 47th president. And running for the White House are former President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris. The presidential race in the US happens every 4 years. However, there is something constant in each election that has remained unchanged for over 175 years, and that is the day of the week when the elections are held: Tuesday. This year as well, Americans will be voting on November 5th, which is also a Tuesday. So why is Tuesday connected to America's democracy? Well, it's a bit of coincidence and tradition. The election day in the United States has been set in stone by federal law. The US law calls for a presidential poll to be held on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. But how did the November Tuesday become so important for US democracy? Let's find out. The US Constitution does not designate a specific day for holding elections. However, it allows Congress to select the time and day for choosing electors or delegates. These delegates, in turn, vote to elect the president and vice president. The Constitution also gives some rights to the states to choose the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives. However, it also permits Congress to make or alter those state rules. So if the day hasn't been fixed, then how did Tuesday come into the picture? The US declared itself independent from Britain in 1776. The United States ratified its constitution in 1788. This was followed by the first elections that were held between November of 1788 and June 1789. Yes, voting that is now done within 1 day took up to 6 months when it first began. And subsequent elections continued to be chaotic. Things changed more than 5 decades later when the 1840 presidential election saw widespread voting fraud. In response, then Representative Alexander Duncan proposed a uniform election day for both presidential and House elections in 1844. The bill initially sought to require all states to hold their elections on a single day. That is on Tuesday after the first Monday in November. While the House passed the bill, the Senate didn't table it before the 1844 election. Alexander Duncan reintroduced the bill in the next session, this time focusing solely on the presidential election. Various amendments were proposed during the bill's consideration. Ultimately, the House adopted the bill, and the Senate passed it with minor corrections. The bill was signed into law on January 23, 1845, by President John Tyler, making Tuesday the official day for Americans to vote for their president. But the mystery remains: why choose a Tuesday? Historians say the answer lies in 19th century American lifestyle. The choice of Tuesday in November is deeply rooted on the country's agrarian culture of the time. November was ideal because it followed the completion of the harvest season. The month also avoided conflicts with both planting in the spring and early fall. This meant that farmers could plant their crop and travel to vote, which would take days in those times. Additionally, Tuesday was chosen due to religious reasons. In Christian practice, the term Sabbath is often used to refer to Sunday. It recognizes the day of Jesus Christ's resurrection, and many Christians would observe a weekly day of rest and worship on Sunday. In the 19th century, polling stations were quite far from rural areas, and for voters, particularly farmers, it meant at least a day-long journey. So to avoid forcing people to travel on the holy day of Sabbath, Monday was not considered, and Wednesday, which was designated as the market day for farmers, was also rejected. Naturally, Tuesday emerged as the prime choice and eventually became the official day. However, Tuesday as an election day has had its fair share of opposition. Modern-day political experts say that voting on a weekend would see an increase in turnout. They argue that holding election on a Tuesday hinders voter access due to work commitments. One of the organizations leading the cause to reassign voting day is called Why Tuesday? Founded in 2005, the group raises awareness about America's low voter turnout. It aims to highlight the lack of accessible voting options, and they are leading the fight to move election day to the weekend. Many countries hold elections on weekends. Australia, Germany, France, and Japan generally conduct elections on Saturdays or Sundays. Brazil votes on the first Sunday of October, with runoffs on the last Sunday if needed. Meanwhile, Mexico shifted from the first Sunday of July to the first Sunday of June from 2021. The European Union also typically holds its parliament election on a weekend. However, in the Anglosphere, such as the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, elections are typically held on weekdays. It is influenced by historical Christian practice of observing Sabbath. Meanwhile, in India, elections occur over multiple days with different phases for various constituencies. In the case of the United States, it's worth noting that while federal elections are on a Tuesday, state and local elections have more flexibility. However, many states align their elections with the federal date simply for convenience. On November 5th, the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, millions of Americans will line up at polling booths. They will exercise their fundamental right of self-governance. As for the Tuesday election day, the law that has continued for over 175 years faces little opposition and will likely remain for many more years to come.